Kayla Carter was only 12, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone much older. She loved her books, especially the ones that let her escape into other worlds, stories of brave girls who found their voice when no one expected them to. But in real life, Kayla's voice often faltered. Reading aloud in front of her classmates made her palms sweat and her throat tighten. Her mother, Rachel Carter, knew this. She had seen it in her daughter's eyes from the time she was little, that mix of brilliance and shyness, like a star that sparkled best when no one was watching. Rachel always told her, "Your words are powerful, baby. You just need to believe in them." But Mr. Thompson, Kayla's teacher, didn't see it that way. The first time he humiliated her, it seemed almost casual. He had asked Kayla to stand and read a passage from the history book. She stumbled over a word, her voice shaking, and before she could finish, he chuckled. "Maybe if you focused more on the lesson and less on doodling in your notebook, you'd read like the rest of the class," he said loudly. The class laughed. Kayla felt her face burn, the sound of the giggles slicing into her chest. She sank into her chair after finishing, her hands trembling under the desk. Rachel noticed her daughter was unusually quiet that evening, but Kayla brushed it off with a weak smile. "It's nothing, Mom. Just school stuff." But it wasn't nothing. The second time came only a week later. During a group discussion, Kayla raised her hand to contribute. She had worked up the courage, rehearsing her answer in her mind. But when she spoke, Mr. Thompson cut her off mid-sentence. "Not quite," he said dismissively. "That's not how we think in this class. Anyone else?" His tone was sharp, but his eyes lingered on her in a way that made her stomach twist. Other students glanced at Kayla and then quickly looked away, afraid of being the next target. By the third incident, Kayla began to realize it wasn't just bad luck, it was deliberate. It was during spelling practice. When she misspelled a word, Mr. Thompson smirked and said, "Come on, Kayla, this is basic. You do speak English at home, don't you?" The words landed like a slap. She heard the laughter ripple again, and this time, she didn't just feel embarrassed. She felt different, singled out. That night, Kayla cried into her pillow. She whispered into the darkness, "Why me?" She didn't have the words for it yet, but deep down she knew. Mr. Thompson wasn't just a strict teacher. He was targeting her voice, her mistakes, even the way she spoke. And every time he did, a piece of her confidence chipped away. Rachel began to notice the change. Kayla, once eager to share her drawings and stories, now kept her sketchbook closed. She ate her dinner in silence. When Rachel asked how school was, Kayla only shrugged. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Rachel didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. And the mother who had always believed in quiet strength would soon discover how far she was willing to go to protect her daughter's dignity. The following weeks at Jefferson Middle School were some of the hardest Kayla Carter had ever endured. Each morning, she tied her braids in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection as if searching for courage. She used to hum while getting ready, scribbled quick sketches in her notebook before the bus arrived, but now she moved slower, quieter, like someone trying not to be noticed. Mr. Thompson had made sure she couldn't hide. It started in subtle ways. When the class handed in their assignments, he would glance at hers and sigh dramatically. "Messy work, Kayla. You need to try harder." Even when her answers were correct, he always circled something in red, as if to remind her she was never good enough. Then there were the times he called on her to answer questions he hadn't finished asking, questions he knew she wasn't ready for. When she stumbled, he'd shake his head. "I expect more from you," he'd say, his voice carrying across the room. Kayla began to notice a pattern. He didn't do this to everyone. He didn't interrupt Ethan, the boy who always blurted out wrong answers. He didn't mock Hannah, who sometimes forgot her homework. It was her, always her. One afternoon during literature class, Mr. Thompson asked the students to recite a short poem from memory. Kayla's hands grew damp as she realized he was scanning the room, looking for his next choice. His eyes landed on her. "Kayla, stand up," he ordered. Her legs trembled as she rose. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck like stones in her throat. Well, he snapped. I can't remember all of it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He smirked. Of course you can't. Maybe if you spent less time drawing in your notebook and more time learning, you'd manage. The class laughed again. Kayla felt her chest tighten. Her vision blurred. She sat down quickly, wishing she could sink into the floor. That night, Rachel found her daughter sitting on the bed, staring at her blank sketchpad. The room smelled faintly of crayons, but Kayla hadn't touched them. "Baby, what's wrong?" Rachel asked, sitting beside her. Kayla hesitated, biting her lip. "Nothing, Mom." Rachel tilted her head. "Don't nothing me. I know my girl. You've been quiet for weeks." Tears welled up in Kayla's eyes. She whispered, "He doesn't like me." Rachel's heart sank. "Who doesn't like you?" "Mr. Thompson." Kayla finally admitted, her voice cracking. He makes fun of me. In front of everyone. Every time I talk, every time I try, it's like he's waiting for me to mess up. And when I do, he laughs. Or he says things. Everyone laughs with him." Rachel felt anger rise in her chest like fire, but she stayed calm for her daughter's sake. "What kinds of things does he say?" Kayla hesitated, then repeated the words that had haunted her. "You do speak English at home, don't you?" Rachel's breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The words cut deep, not just because of what they meant, but because she knew how they must have felt to her daughter. Kayla sobbed into her mother's arms, muffled words spilling out. "Why me, Mom? Why does he always pick on me? I try, I really do, but it's never enough for him. It's like I don't belong there." Rachel held her close, stroking her braids gently. Her mind was racing. This wasn't just strict teaching. This was targeted, deliberate, and worse, it was breaking her daughter piece by piece. When Kayla finally cried herself to sleep, Rachel sat in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, staring at her daughter's face. She remembered her own school days, when she had been the only black girl at her class, the whispers, the subtle comments teachers never corrected. She had promised herself that her daughter wouldn't have to carry those same scars. And now here it was again. Rachel clenched her fists. Quiet strength had always been her way, but strength wasn't silence. Something had to be done. But before she acted, she knew she needed proof. Because Mr. Thompson wasn't just hurting Kayla. He was showing every student in that classroom that it was acceptable to humiliate a child like her. Rachel was about to change that. The next few weeks dragged on, and every school day felt heavier for Kayla. She no longer looked forward to the morning bus ride with her friends. Instead, she sat near the window in silence, bracing herself for whatever new humiliation Mr. Thompson had prepared. She noticed it more clearly now. How his tone sharpened whenever he spoke to her, how his patience thinned faster when she raised her hand, how his praise seemed to flow easily toward other students, but never in her direction. One Friday morning, the class worked on a group assignment about civil rights leaders. Kayla's group had prepared a short presentation on Rosa Parks. She had practiced her part over and over, whispering the words to herself at night. But when it was her turn to present, her voice cracked halfway through the first sentence. "Speak up, Kayla," Mr. Thompson interrupted loudly. "We can't hear you." She tried again, her voice trembling. He shook his head, his expression exaggerated with mock disappointment. "If you can't even deliver a simple line in front of your peers, how will you ever manage outside this classroom?" The sting of laughter returned. Kayla froze, her eyes stinging with tears. She sat down before finishing her part, her shoulders folding inward like a shield. That afternoon, when Rachel asked about school, Kayla didn't even pretend anymore. She muttered, "It doesn't matter what I do, Mom. He's always waiting for me to mess up. It's like he wants me to fail." Rachel's chest tightened. Hearing the defeat in her daughter's voice was worse than hearing the insults themselves. She reached across the table, squeezing Kayla's hand. "Baby, you're not the problem. He is." But Rachel knew words weren't enough. She needed to act. That night, while Kayla slept, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. She began writing down everything Kayla had told her, each comment, each incident. She dated them, detailed them. The next step was harder. Rachel reached out to other parents she knew, carefully phrasing her questions so it didn't sound like gossip. To her surprise, she wasn't the only one with concerns. One mother admitted her son had been called slow in front of a whole class. Another father recalled how his daughter had come home crying after being told she wasn't leadership material. The stories echoed Kayla's experience, different words, same humiliation. "Have you reported it?" Rachel asked. They shrugged. "What's the point? He's been teaching there for years. Nothing ever changes." Rachel bit back her frustration. She understood their fear, but she also knew silence only protected the wrong person. A week later, Rachel made a quiet decision. She gave Kayla a small recorder hidden in the pocket of her backpack. "Mom, what's this for?" Kayla asked, confused. Rachel brushed a hand gently over her daughter's cheek. "Just keep it with you in class. You don't have to do anything. Just let it be there. Sometimes the truth speaks louder than anything else." Kayla hesitated, but then nodded. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope stirred inside her. The following Monday, Rachel waited anxiously after school. When Kayla walked through the door, her face pale, but determined, she handed the recorder over. Rachel pressed play. The scratchy sound of classroom chatter filled the room, followed by Mr. Thompson's voice. "Kayla, for heaven's sake, this isn't complicated. Are you trying to embarrass yourself? Or is this just the best you can do?" The recording captured the laughter that followed, Kayla's trembling voice trying to answer, and his sharp interruption. "Sit down. I don't have time for this." Rachel's hands shook as she turned the device off. Hearing it was worse than imagining it. There it was, the evidence, the cruelty, the arrogance. Rachel looked at her daughter, who was hugging her arms tightly across her chest. "Mom, it's not just me, right? He does this on purpose." Rachel pulled her into her arms, holding her close. "You're not imagining it, baby, and you're not alone. We're going to fix this. I promise." For the first time, Kayla allowed herself to believe it. Maybe her mother's strength could protect her. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't powerless after all. And Rachel Carter knew one thing with certainty. Mr. Thompson had picked the wrong child to target, because behind her stood a mother who was ready to fight. By the time Rachel had listened to the recording 3 times, her resolve had hardened. She had always believed in handling problems with dignity, but this wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about a teacher abusing his authority and humiliating her daughter in ways that could scar her for years. The next morning, Rachel called the school and requested a meeting with Mr. Thompson. When she walked into his classroom after dismissal, the smell of chalk and dust hung in the air. Mr. Thompson sat at his desk, scribbling notes with the same detached air he carried in the classroom. He barely looked up when she stepped inside. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone clipped, "what can I do for you?" Rachel kept her voice calm, though her heart was pounding. "It's about Kayla. She's been coming home upset for weeks now. She feels singled out, humiliated." He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Humiliated? I run a disciplined classroom. Some children don't take correction well. That's not my fault." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "Correction is one thing. Belittling is another. You've called her out in front of an entire class, mocked her answers, even made comments about her background." Mr. Thompson's expression hardened. "If you're implying there's some bias here, I'd be careful. I treat all my students the same." Rachel leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "Do you? Because I've spoken with other parents and the pattern is clear. And I've heard the way you speak to my daughter with my own ears." For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. "Excuse me?" Rachel slipped her phone from her purse and placed it on the desk. She recorded it. "Do you want to hear yourself?" His face flushed, but his tone grew defensive. "Recordings without consent aren't admissible. If you think you can build a case against me, on the word of a 12-year-old. Rachel cut him off, her voice sharp now. Don't you dare minimize her because she's a child. That's exactly the problem. You think you can say anything to her and no one will notice. But I noticed, and now others are starting to as well. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then Mr. Thompson smirked faintly, leaning back in his chair again. You can take this to the principal if you want. I've been here 15 years. I know how these things go. Parents complain, and then they move on. Rachel's jaw tightened. Not this time. She stood, slipping her phone back into her purse. You may think your years here make you untouchable, but you've underestimated one thing. He raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Rachel met his gaze firmly. A mother who refuses to let her daughter be broken. Without another word, she left his classroom. That evening, she sat with Kayla at the kitchen table. Her daughter's eyes were wary, as though bracing for bad news. What happened, Mom? Kayla asked softly. Rachel reached across the table, taking her hand. I spoke to him. He tried to dismiss it, to brush me off. But I didn't back down. And I won't. This isn't over. For the first time in weeks, Kayla's lips curved into the faintest smile. You really told him off, didn't you? Rachel chuckled softly, though her heart was heavy. Not enough yet, but we're just getting started. That night, while Kayla slept peacefully for the first time in days, Rachel sat awake with her laptop open. She researched school board complaint procedures, parent rights, and state laws on teacher conduct. She messaged the parents she had spoken to before, asking if they would be willing to put their concerns in writing. By midnight, Rachel had a folder of notes, testimonies, and recordings. It wasn't just evidence, it was ammunition. Mr. Thompson had dismissed her, confident that his years of tenure and authority would shield him. But Rachel Carter had no intention of letting her daughter's pain be forgotten in paperwork or brushed aside in polite conversation. She was preparing for something bigger, something louder. Because if the school wouldn't hold him accountable, she would. Rachel Carter was not a woman who sought conflict, but she also wasn't the kind who walked away from it when her child's dignity was on the line. After her tense meeting with Mr. Thompson, she knew he would try to bury the situation. If she wanted justice for Kayla, she had to make it impossible for the school to ignore. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel became both investigator and advocate. On her days off from the hospital, she called parents, sat down for coffee with them, and listened to their stories. One father described how his son had been told in front of the class that he wouldn't make it past community college. Another mother shared that her daughter had been mocked for her accent after moving from out of state. Rachel wrote everything down, her notes filling page after page in her binder. She organized them by date, by student, by type of humiliation. The pattern was undeniable. Mr. Thompson wasn't just strict. He had built a classroom culture where embarrassment was a teaching tool. But Rachel noticed something else. Most of the children who had been singled out were students of color or kids who didn't fit the mold of the school's majority. The bias was subtle but persistent, and the damage it caused was painfully visible in Kayla's shrinking confidence. Rachel's case was building, but she needed more than testimonies. She needed witnesses. She reached out to parents one more time. I know it's hard, she told them, but the school board won't listen unless we stand together. If it's just me, they'll dismiss it. If it's all of us, they'll have no choice. Some hesitated. They worried about retaliation, about their kids being punished. But slowly, one by one, a few agreed. They were tired of watching their children come home defeated, tired of shrugging it off. By the time Rachel scheduled her appointment with the school board, she had gathered 3 parents willing to attend with her and 5 written statements from others who couldn't come but wanted their voices heard. The day of the meeting, Rachel dressed with quiet determination. She wore her navy blue blazer, the one she had bought years ago for job interviews. Kayla watched her from the doorway, chewing her lip nervously. Are you nervous, Mom? She asked. Rachel smiled gently. A little. But I'm more determined than nervous. This isn't just about you anymore, baby. It's about every kid in that classroom who deserves respect. Kayla stepped forward, hugging her tightly. Thank you for fighting for me. Rachel held her daughter close. Always. When she walked into the school board's office, the room was already filled with the low murmur of conversation. The long table at the front was lined with board members, clipboards in hand. The principal sat stiffly near the center, and at the far end of the table, Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his face calm, almost smug. Rachel felt her stomach twist, but she kept her expression steady as she took her seat with the other parents beside her. The board chair, a stern woman with silver hair, adjusted her glasses. "Mrs. Carter, you requested this meeting regarding concerns about Mr. Thompson's classroom conduct. Please proceed." Rachel opened her binder slowly, letting the weight of her preparation steady her. "Thank you. I'm here because my daughter, Kayla, has been repeatedly humiliated and singled out in Mr. Thompson's class. She isn't the only one. Several students have experienced similar treatment, and I have statements from parents to support this." She slid copies of the testimonies across the table. The board members leaned in to read. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his voice calm but condescending. "If I may, every teacher knows some parents will complain when their child doesn't perform as expected. Discipline isn't humiliation. Some children simply don't respond well to correction." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Correction is private, respectful, and meant to build a child up. What you're doing is public, cruel, and meant to tear them down. That's not discipline. That's abuse." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the board members raised an eyebrow. "Do you have specific examples, Mrs. Carter?" Rachel pressed play on her phone. The room filled with a scratchy recording. Mr. Thompson's mocking voice, Kayla's trembling attempt at an answer, and the sharp interruption followed by laughter. The silence afterward was deafening. Rachel's voice was quiet but firm. "That's my daughter you just heard, 12 years old, and that was her teacher's idea of correction." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. The principal shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Thompson's confident smirk faltered, but only for a moment. "I stand by my methods," he said stiffly. "Students need to learn resilience. The world won't coddle them." Rachel leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "Resilience doesn't come from being mocked. It comes from being challenged with respect. You don't teach resilience by breaking children down until they're too afraid to speak. You teach fear, and my daughter has been living in that fear every day she walks into your classroom." The board chair raised a hand, silencing the room. "We'll review this evidence and take it under consideration." Rachel nodded, though she could see the reluctance in their faces. She had planted the seed, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Mr. Thompson still believed his tenure protected him, and the board looked hesitant to move against a long-standing teacher. But Rachel also saw something else, a crack in his armor. For the first time, he wasn't untouchable, and she intended to widen that crack until the whole truth came through. The morning sun streamed through the blinds as Rachel Carter tied her hair back and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. Today was not going to be like the other days. Today, she wasn't just Kayla's mother, she was her shield, her voice, her fight. Downstairs, Kayla sat quietly at the breakfast table, absent-mindedly stirring her cereal. Her shoulders were hunched, her once bright eyes dimmed. Rachel walked over, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "You don't have to fight this alone anymore, baby. I've got you." Kayla looked up, her lip trembling. "But, Mom, he'll just keep doing it. He doesn't like me. He makes everyone laugh at me." Rachel crouched down, so her eyes were level with her daughter's. "And today, he'll learn what happens when he tries to break my child's spirit." At school, Mr. Thompson's classroom buzzed with the usual chatter of students filing in. He stood at the front, flipping through his notes with that smug expression Kayla had grown to dread. But just before the bell rang, the door opened, and in walked Rachel. She wasn't loud, she wasn't angry, at least not on the surface. She wore her composure like armor. Mr. Thompson looked up, surprised. "Mrs. Carter," he said, forcing a polite smile, "this isn't parent-teacher conference day. Is something wrong?" Rachel returned his smile, but her eyes were steel. "Actually, yes. I thought today would be the perfect day for me to sit in and observe." See how my daughter and her classmates are being taught." A ripple of whispers spread through the students. Kayla froze in her seat, her heart racing. She hadn't known her mother was coming. Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Well, that's not usually how we do things." Rachel interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "Then consider today an exception. Unless, of course, there's something you don't want me to see." The room fell silent. Even the students sensed the weight in her words. With no choice, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and began the lesson. At first, he avoided looking at Kayla, but his usual arrogance soon returned. When it came time for students to read aloud, he glanced at Kayla's desk. Rachel noticed it instantly, that calculated pause, that smirk tugging at his lips. "Kayla," he said, his tone dripping with mockery, "why don't you do the honors? Unless, of course, it's too difficult for you." The class tensed. Everyone knew what was coming. Kayla's hands trembled as she picked up the book, her throat tightening with fear. But before she could open her mouth, Rachel stood up. "Actually," she said, her voice ringing clear across the room, "Kayla will sit this one out. I'd like to read instead." The entire class turned toward her, stunned. Rachel took the book from her daughter's desk and began reading aloud, her voice steady, warm, commanding. Every word rolled effortlessly, each sentence infused with the strength Kayla had always lacked in those moments. When she finished, Rachel closed the book gently and looked directly at Mr. Thompson. That's how Kayla reads at home. She reads with heart, with imagination, and with a love for learning that no amount of ridicule can take away. But in this classroom, something or someone has been trying to crush that, and I won't let it continue. Mr. Thompson's face flushed red. He opened his mouth to protest, but Rachel stepped closer. Her voice was calm, but the authority in it silenced him. Humiliating a child doesn't make you a better teacher. It makes you a bully with a desk at the front of the room. And if you think I'm going to let my daughter or any child in this class be torn down day after day, you're very mistaken. This ends today. The students sat frozen, wide-eyed, as if they were witnessing a battle they'd never seen before. Even Kayla's classmates, who had laughed nervously at her humiliation before, looked at Mr. Thompson with new eyes. Rachel turned to the class. "Don't ever be afraid to use your voice. And don't let anyone, teacher, student, or otherwise, make you feel less than what you are. You are capable. You are worthy. And you deserve respect." For the first time in weeks, Kayla lifted her head high. Her chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in a long time, pride. Rachel then faced Mr. Thompson one last time. "I'll also be speaking with the principal after this, because if this classroom isn't a place of learning and respect, then it's not a classroom at all." With that, she gathered her things, took Kayla's hand, and walked her out. The students' eyes followed them, admiration clear on their faces. Kayla squeezed her mother's hand, tears brimming in her eyes. "Mom, you really did it. You stood up for me." Rachel smiled down at her. "No, baby. We did it together. And from now on, no one gets to silence your voice, not even a teacher." For the first time in weeks, Kayla's laughter returned as they walked down the hall, her small hand secure in her mother's grip. And Mr. Thompson, left behind in a room full of witnesses, would never forget the lesson he had been taught that day.